What if a single encounter changed everything? In tonight's chilling short story, meet Riley, a bartender caught in a web spun by two dangerous strangers. They're offering her an opportunity she can't refuse. But is it really a chance, or is it a trap designed to pull her into a world darker than anything she's ever imagined? As the minutes tick by, the stakes rise, and the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Will Riley escape, or will she become another pawn in a game she never asked to play? The clock is ticking. The shadows are closing in. Stay tuned, because you won't want to miss what happens next. Part 1. The Night Shift at the Dive Bar. I'm Riley, and I work the closing shift at a small dive bar in the quieter part of town. The place isn't anything fancy. It's not the kind of establishment that draws in the younger crowd. The kind that's into trendy cocktails and Instagram-worthy decor. No! This bar is for people who come for one thing: a stiff drink, an easy atmosphere, and a place to unwind. The kind of bar you might expect to find on a forgotten street in a sleepy town, nestled between an old gas station and a row of closed-up shops. The parking lot is often empty, except for a few cars, mostly the same ones that come every night. It's one of those spots that locals frequent, and newcomers never really seem to stick around. The bar is located just off the highway, so we get some truckers passing through, the occasional tourist who's wandered off the main road, or the regulars who live nearby. It's got the same dim lighting every night, and the jukebox plays a never-ending loop of classic rock that's as old as the walls themselves. The drinks are cheap, the service is friendly enough, and no one asks questions. If you want a drink and a little peace, you'll get it here. If you want to chat, that's fine too, but don't expect to be a stranger for long. You'll quickly become a regular just by showing up a couple of times. I've been working here for a while now, and the routine is predictable, which is part of the reason I like it. There's a certain comfort in knowing exactly what to expect. I've learned how to handle every type of customer. Some of them come in after a hard day, just wanting to nurse a drink and leave without saying much. Others come in to talk, to flirt, to fill the space between their own thoughts with conversation. And a few come in just to sit at the bar, quiet and brooding, nursing their own demons in their glass. I've gotten used to them all, but there's one thing that always feels off about working the night shift here. I'm the only one on the clock most of the time. The bar's small enough that we don't need extra help, and the slower weeknights mean there's no real reason to have a second bartender or a bar back. It's always just me, serving drinks, wiping down the counter, making small talk with the regulars when they're in the mood, and doing my best to keep things running smoothly. On weekends, when the bar fills up more, I get a little extra help, but during the week, it's just me and the few customers who come in. There's something about being alone that makes you hyper-aware of everything around you. The creak of the floorboards, the way the jukebox clicks over to the next track, the distant hum of the refrigerator in the back. Everything becomes more pronounced when it's just you. It's almost like the quiet itself is watching you. That's when I notice the little things. Like when someone's been sitting at the bar a little too long without touching their drink, or when someone's been eyeing their phone for too long, like they're waiting for something to happen. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I can't help it. It's part of the job. It's a bar, after all, and we get our fair share of odd characters. The tips are decent enough. The regulars know I'm reliable, and most of the truckers passing through are polite enough to give me a decent tip, even if they're only here for an hour. I've come to appreciate the predictability of my job, the familiar faces, the quiet routine. But there are nights, like tonight, when I wish I had someone else around to share the load, to just talk to. When you work alone so often, the silence can get to you. It's not a bad silence, but a heavy one, filled with the weight of things unsaid. That night, though, something felt different. It was just after 1 a.m. on a Tuesday when he walked in. I had been wiping down the bar, mentally going over the inventory list in my head, when the door opened with a soft jingle. I glanced up to see him. At first, I thought he was just another trucker passing through, maybe someone needing to rest for a bit. But as he stepped in, I noticed him immediately. He was in his late 40s, maybe, but he looked way too polished for this place. His clothes didn't fit the usual attire you'd expect in a dive bar. No trucker hats or flannel shirts here. No! This guy was wearing a black turtleneck under a sleek, long black coat. He looked like he had just stepped off a plane from a business trip, not someone looking for a quiet drink at a bar like ours. And his presence, it was different. There was a certain air about him, an elegance, not the kind that shouted, "Look at me," but the kind that made you notice him without really trying. He didn't have that usual rugged, "I'm just passing through" vibe that most of the truckers have. Instead, he moved with this quiet confidence, like he belonged somewhere important. But he wasn't flashy, just understated, with a kind of sophistication that made him stand out in this part of town. I couldn't quite place it, but there was something about him that felt off. As he walked in, he glanced around the room slowly, taking in the faded posters on the walls, the low hum of the jukebox, the regulars sitting at their usual spots. Then his eyes landed on the bar, and he made a straight line toward it, taking a seat on the stool closest to me. I made my way over, trying to shake off the sense of unease I couldn't quite explain. "Can I get you something?" I asked, trying to sound as casual as possible. He looked at the bottles behind me, then turned back to face me with a small, almost polite smile. "I'll have something top shelf," he said, his voice smooth but with a subtle warmth to it. Not the kind of voice you usually hear in a bar like this. There was no gruffness, no attempt to be overly friendly. He wasn't trying too hard. He was just there. I reached for the bottle of bourbon on the shelf, my fingers brushing against the glass, but I couldn't stop myself from stealing a glance at him. He was still watching me with that same mild smile, like he wasn't quite sure what to make of the place either. "So, do you like working here?" he asked, out of nowhere, as I poured his drink. The question caught me off guard. It wasn't the first time a customer had asked me about my job, but it wasn't exactly normal for someone to ask it so directly. Still, I shrugged, offering a light smile. "Yeah, it's not bad," I replied. "The tips are decent. It's quiet most of the time." I made a little joke about the perks of bartending, about the people watching, and the low-stress vibe. He chuckled lightly, then took a sip of his drink, nodding thoughtfully. "It's good to find work like that," he said, then paused. "But have you ever thought about doing something bigger?" Now, that caught me off guard. I'm used to the usual, "What are you doing with your life?" type of questions, but this one felt different. Like there was an underlying meaning behind it. Something more than just casual small talk. I wasn't sure if he was probing for something, or if he was genuinely curious. I smiled politely. "I'm happy where I am for now," I said. It wasn't the most exciting answer, but I wasn't about to spill my whole life story to a guy who just walked in. He nodded, almost like he expected that response, and took another sip from his glass. I could tell he wasn't expecting me to say anything else, but the silence that followed was strange, a little too quiet for comfort. I wiped down the bar as he finished his drink, feeling the weight of his gaze on me the entire time. Part 2. A curious conversation. The silence between us lingered in a way that felt unnatural. The usual clinks of glass and chatter from the regulars didn't seem to fill the space as they normally did. The jukebox was playing another classic rock song, but it felt more like a soundtrack to my thoughts, drowning out the sounds of the bar. I focused on wiping down the counter again, hoping it would somehow make the moment less awkward. It didn't. He was still there, his drink finished, just watching me. I felt like he was waiting for something, but I wasn't sure what it was. His gaze was steady, but not in a way that made me uncomfortable, more like someone analyzing a scene in a play. I didn't like being analyzed, but I wasn't about to let him know that. So, I kept cleaning. A bartender's trick. Keep busy. Avoid looking too interested and the moment passes. After a few minutes, he placed his empty glass down on the counter with a soft tap and pushed it forward. Another? I asked, my eyes flicking over to the empty glass. He shook his head just slightly. No, I think I'm good for now. He didn't move to get up though. Instead, he just sat there, not rushing to leave. Most people who come in for a drink either finish up and leave or stay for another. But this guy didn't seem like he was going anywhere anytime soon. There was something in his eyes that told me he wasn't done here, even if he was finished with his drink. I leaned against the counter and gave him a smile, trying to make the situation less stiff. So, I said, leaning in slightly, "What exactly did you mean when you asked if I wanted to do something bigger?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a deep breath, like he was carefully considering his response. The soft light from the bar reflected off his glasses, and for a moment, I could see the faintest crease between his brows. He was deep in thought, but then, as if he decided he was ready to share, he spoke. "I'm just curious," he said slowly, "about people, about why they choose certain paths. You could be doing anything. You're smart. This bar's a nice place, but it's not. I don't know, glamorous. I just thought you might want more. You ever think about that?" His words were polite enough, but they carried an undertone I couldn't quite place. There was something about the way he phrased things, like he was trying to push me towards something without fully saying it. And maybe that's why I didn't like it. I wasn't looking for some deep life advice from a man I just met in a dive bar at 1:30 in the morning. It felt manipulative in a way. I let out a soft laugh, keeping things light. "I'm happy here," I said again. "I mean, not everyone needs to be a CEO or something, right? Some people just like to be..." He nodded, but his gaze didn't leave me. "Yeah, but what if being happy here means you're missing out on something? You ever think about what else you could do? Something more exciting? More profitable?" I could feel a tightness building in my chest. I wasn't sure if I was more irritated or uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was going. It wasn't that his words weren't true, it's just, I didn't like being told what to want, or what I should be doing. This was my life, my choice. "I'm good," I said firmly, though there was a slight tremor in my voice that I immediately tried to cover up. "I've got my own plans." He leaned back in his seat and studied me for a moment longer before finally letting out a small sigh. "Fair enough," he said, almost like he was disappointed, but not upset. He drained his glass in one smooth motion, and then slid a crisp $100 bill across the counter. The way he did it was almost effortless, like he didn't care that the money was worth a lot more than the drink he'd had. I stared at the bill for a moment, surprised at the generosity. It wasn't the first time someone had tipped well, but something about the gesture felt off. It was too much for a simple drink, too much for a conversation that hadn't gone anywhere meaningful. And yet, there it was, $100, sitting on the counter like it was a casual tip from a friend. I looked back at him. "Thank you," I said, though I wasn't sure if I should feel grateful or uneasy. It wasn't like I was in desperate need of the money, but something about the way it was given made me feel like I owed him something. And I didn't like that feeling. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was knowing, almost like he was satisfied with something I didn't understand yet. "It was a pleasure talking to you, Cadence," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge to it. "I'll be seeing you around." With that, he stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked toward the door without looking back. He didn't wait for me to say anything else. Didn't try to continue the conversation or ask for anything. He just left, like it was a normal night, like nothing about this had been out of place. I watched him walk out into the night, the door jingling softly behind him. The bar seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as soon as he was gone. The quiet felt less oppressive now, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I glanced down at the $100 bill, still sitting on the counter. It felt like it had been left there for a reason, like a breadcrumb that meant something more than a generous tip. But what? Part 3. The return. The next week felt like any other. The bar was quieter than usual, the regulars coming in and out with barely a word exchanged. I went through the motions, preparing drinks, wiping down counters, making light conversation when it was needed. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the thought of him. The man who came in, asked strange questions, and tipped generously without seeming to care. Something about him gnawed at me. The way his questions were so pointed, his observations so perceptive, yet unnervingly casual. And then, just like that, he came back. Only this time, he wasn't alone. It was a Wednesday, nearly the same time as last week, when the door opened with a soft jingle. I turned to see them, him and a woman who couldn't have been more than 10 years younger than him. She was dressed a little out of place, like she was trying to fit into a younger crowd, but not quite pulling it off. Her clothes were trendy, but looked like she was trying too hard to be cool, the kind of person who spends too much time curating their look on social media. Part 3. The return. The next week felt like any other. The bar was quieter than usual, the regulars coming in and out with barely a word exchanged. I went through the motions, preparing drinks, wiping down counters, making light conversation when it was needed. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the thought of him. The man who came in, asked strange questions, and tipped generously without seeming to care. Something about him gnawed at me. The way his questions were so pointed, his observations so perceptive, yet unnervingly casual. And then, just like that, he came back. Only this time he wasn't alone. It was a Wednesday, nearly the same time as last week, when the door opened with a soft jingle. I turned to see them, him and a woman who couldn't have been more than 10 years younger than him. She was dressed a little out of place, like she was trying to fit into a younger crowd, but not quite pulling it off. Her clothes were trendy, but looked like she was trying too hard to be cool, the kind of person who spends too much time curating their look on social media. The moment she walked in, my instincts kicked into high gear. There was something about her that felt rehearsed, like everything she did was calculated. When she smiled, it was too bright, too eager, as if she was trying to project an image of friendliness that didn't quite match her eyes. It wasn't natural, not the kind of friendliness you'd expect in a bar like this. They walked up to the bar together. The man steps confident, the woman's more tentative, as if she was waiting for his approval before making any moves. She looked at me, then flashed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was almost predatory. Before I could greet them, she spoke first, her voice loud and overly familiar. "You're so pretty," she said, her fingers brushing against my arm as she said it. It was a touch that lingered too long. It wasn't sexual, but it felt like it was meant to be something more, something calculated. My skin crawled, but I forced myself to smile. "Thanks," I said, stepping back slightly, trying to create some space. But she didn't seem to pick up on my discomfort. Instead, she kept talking, asking me about my job, how long I'd worked here, and a series of other seemingly harmless questions. But the way she asked, like she was collecting information, made my skin itch. Part 4. The proposition. As the woman continued talking, I kept my focus on them, trying to maintain the professionalism that came naturally with the job. But something about their interaction felt off. The man, who had been so chatty during his first visit, was silent now. It was like he had turned into a background figure, letting her take the lead in the conversation. But there was a strange tension in the air. He wasn't looking at me, but I could feel his eyes on me, almost like he was analyzing my every move. "Do you like working here?" the woman asked suddenly, her voice sweet but with an edge to it that I couldn't ignore. "You seem so comfortable. I mean, you're a pretty girl. You've got that vibe, right?" Her words were bizarre, and they immediately threw me off. I wasn't sure if she was trying to flatter me, or if she was just saying what she thought would make me feel at ease. But I could tell this wasn't the usual type of small talk I was used to. "I'm good here," I said, keeping my response short, hoping she would take the hint and move on. But instead, she smiled wider, leaning in just a little too close for comfort. "Well," she said, her eyes darting between the man and me, "I run an exclusive event club. You know, private parties for a select few people. It's a great way to make money. 10 grand for a weekend. Just think about it. How many people get that kind of opportunity? You're young. You could make a fortune." She said it casually, like it was an everyday suggestion. But there was something about the way she said it. Her voice dropping to a whisper and her eyes gleaming with that too perfect smile that made my stomach churn. It felt like she wasn't just offering me a chance at something big. No, it felt like she was trying to reel me in, like I was being sold on something I didn't even want. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I just stared at her, my fingers curling around the glass I had just set down on the counter. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to lure me into some shady business, but this felt different. Her smile didn't falter, though. It was like she was waiting for my response, but I wasn't ready to give her one. I wasn't about to bite. I laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was forced, awkward. "Sounds too good to be true," I said, trying to deflect. "I think I'm good with the job I have." Her smile didn't drop. Instead, she leaned in closer, her perfume hitting my senses as she spoke in a low, almost seductive tone. "You should think it over, honey. It's a great deal, and I know a lot of girls who've done it. They've made bank. You could be one of them. You'd fit right in. Fun, safe, exclusive. Think about it. I could make a phone call right now, and you'd be set for the weekend." I felt a wave of discomfort surge through me. My instincts were screaming at me to walk away from this conversation. But I wasn't the type to let things escalate without first pushing back. So I took a step back, keeping my voice even but firm. "I'm good," I said, no longer trying to mask the irritation in my tone. "Thanks for the offer, but I'm not interested. Just here to work." For a split second, her smile faltered. I saw the flash of frustration in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with another sweet grin. "Of course, honey. I understand," she said, her voice a little too sugary. "But if you change your mind, let me know. I can always make sure the invite's open. Her words left a lingering chill in the air. She pushed herself off the counter, brushing her hand against my arm again in what I could only describe as an almost rehearsed touch, as though she were testing the waters. I could tell they were preparing to leave, but I wasn't sure if I should let them go. Something told me this wasn't over. I had no idea what they were really after, but the way she'd propositioned me, so casually, felt like a trap. "Are you sure?" she asked, her eyes not quite meeting mine, as she glanced over at the man beside her. "One last drink, maybe? You never know when a good opportunity will come knocking." I gave her a tight smile. "I'm good. Thank you," I said firmly. "You're welcome to stay, though." Without another word, she looked at the man, who still hadn't said a thing, and nodded toward the door. They left just as suddenly as they had come, and the door jingled behind them, signaling their departure. I watched them walk across the parking lot, feeling like there was more to this interaction than just an empty offer. I wasn't sure what their game was, but I had a sinking feeling this wasn't the last time I'd see them. Part 5. A Threat Lurks. For the next few days, I pushed the encounter to the back of my mind. It seemed like something so strange. It couldn't have been real. Maybe they were just a couple of oddballs who liked to make strange propositions. I wasn't going to waste time overthinking it. But then, a few nights later, it happened again. I was just about to close up for the night when I spotted the car across the street. I froze for a moment as I noticed it idling in the shadows. My heart skipped a beat. It was the same car from last week, the black van. I hadn't seen it parked there since then, but now here it was again, parked just across from the bar. The headlights were off and the engine was silent. For a second, I wondered if it was just some random car, but then my mind flashed back to the woman and the man from the week before. Something about this felt far from random. I kept my eyes on the van as I finished closing up the bar, my stomach twisting in knots. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting. But as I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt that familiar sensation, like someone was watching me. I moved quickly toward my car, keeping my head down, trying not to let my unease show. I could feel my keys in my pocket, my fingers tight around them in case I needed them. When I reached my car and pulled out of the lot, I made sure to check my mirrors. The van had followed me, but it was keeping its distance, just enough to avoid suspicion. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that it was probably nothing. It was late, I was tired, and I was overthinking things again. But as I turned onto a side street, the van turned too. My heart started to race, and I couldn't keep the panic from rising in my chest. It had to be. I couldn't afford to keep driving in circles, so I made a split-second decision. Without thinking, I pulled into the parking lot of a police station nearby, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The second I entered the lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The van sped off, its headlights flashing as it turned down another street. The relief I felt was instant, but it was overshadowed by the realization that I wasn't imagining things. Whoever these people were, they were following me, and they weren't going to stop. Part 6. Another night, another encounter. After that, things were quiet for a while, but the tension in the air didn't go away. Every time I worked the late shift, I kept an eye out, half expecting the woman and her companion to show up again. I wasn't sure if they were just some strange people passing through, or if there was something more sinister going on. Then one evening, she walked in again, alone this time. My heart skipped a beat as I saw her slip through the door, her smile fixed in place. She made her way to the bar, and I felt my entire body tense. I texted my boss as discreetly as I could, my fingers shaking just enough to make the message hard to type. "Just checking in," she said, her voice too bright. "Thought I'd come check on you. See how you're doing." There it was again, that strange, unsettling familiarity in her voice. She wasn't here for a drink, not really. She was here for something else, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out what. Part 7. The fear creeps in. She sat down at the bar without hesitation, her eyes never leaving me. There was something unnerving about the way she moved. It wasn't as if she had casually come to grab a drink or chat. No! This felt like something planned. She leaned in slightly, her smile still plastered on her face, but it was too wide, too rehearsed. "So, Riley," she said, her tone sweet, yet too sugary. "How's everything been? You still working those late shifts?" I didn't answer right away. I just kept my eyes on her, trying to read her, trying to figure out what she was up to. She wasn't here just for small talk. I could feel it in my gut. "I'm good," I finally said, keeping my voice calm, though inside I was starting to feel a familiar knot form in my stomach. Still working the usual hours. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms in an attempt to distance myself from the conversation. But she didn't seem to pick up on the discomfort I was trying to project. Instead, she smiled even wider, her gaze flicking to the empty seats around us. The bar was quiet, just like it usually was late on a Tuesday night. I felt alone in a way that I hadn't before. It wasn't the usual solitude. This was different. Her presence made the whole room feel claustrophobic, like there was something lurking just beyond the shadows. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice as if sharing some kind of secret, though no one else was around to overhear. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation last week," she said, as if picking up where we left off. "I really think you should consider my offer. You'd be perfect for the work we do. You've got the look, the charm. People would love you." A chill ran through me as I processed her words. I had thought maybe it was a fluke. Maybe she was just trying to get me to bite on some wild pitch. But now she was back, still pushing. And the more she spoke, the more it felt like I had no way out. "I'm happy where I am," I replied firmly, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. I could feel my pulse quicken, and I knew I had to stop her before she pushed further. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed just slightly, as if she was sizing me up, trying to figure out my breaking point. "Of course you are, but just think about it. $10,000 for a weekend? That's a lot of money. What would you do with that? You could take a nice vacation, get yourself something special. You could finally be free of this place." I shook my head. I don't need that kind of money," I said, my voice tight. The way she spoke made everything feel slimy, like I was trapped in some kind of sales pitch I hadn't asked for. She was pushing my limits now, trying to manipulate me into taking her offer. Her smile faded a little, just a flicker of irritation crossing her features. But she didn't give up. "Well, think it over. No pressure." She pulled back slightly, as if giving me some space, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. Just as I thought she might leave, she dropped another bombshell. "Oh, and by the way," she said, casually picking up her glass, "you wouldn't be the only one working this weekend. There's a whole team of girls, all handpicked for these events. You'd be joining a group of people who know how to have a good time. Trust me, you'd love it." I felt a wave of revulsion wash over me. This wasn't just about a job or money anymore. It was about something darker. I had a sick feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake. My mind raced, and all I wanted was for her to leave, to get out of my space, to leave me in peace. "Look," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'm not interested. Please leave me alone." For a moment, her gaze hardened. The sweetness in her expression slipped, revealing something cold beneath. But just as quickly, she masked it again, her smile returning like a mask she had perfected over the years. "I see. I get it, Riley. You're just not ready." She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were carefully planning her next step. The man who had been silent the whole time finally shifted in his seat, looking over at me, his face expressionless. He hadn't said a word during the entire conversation, but I felt like he was waiting for something that never came. "All right, Riley," the woman said, her tone suddenly businesslike. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me." She tossed a few bills on the counter for her drink, her fingers brushing against the cash as if it meant nothing. I watched them leave, her steps echoing as she walked toward the door. I stood there, frozen for a moment, staring at the door as it swung shut behind them. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I had been so focused on her that I didn't notice the man's steady gaze until he too had turned and followed her out. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at me, but I couldn't quite place it. I stood there for a long while, the room silent, the music from the jukebox now feeling distant. I should have felt relieved that they were gone, but instead I felt vulnerable, exposed, like I was a target and I didn't even know why. Part 8. The Growing Fear. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The woman's words echoed in my mind, her offer lingering in the back of my thoughts. $10,000. The kind of money that could change everything. But the more I thought about it, the worse it felt. There was nothing good about the way she spoke, nothing that made me think this was a legitimate business proposition. It felt like a trap. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overreacting. But I couldn't deny the anxiety that kept creeping in. It was as though they were playing a game with me, and I didn't know the rules. I wasn't some naive girl who would fall for an offer like that, but they had a way of making me second-guess myself. Over the next few nights, I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of them. The woman, the man, either one of them could show up at any moment. And sure enough, a few days later, I saw the car again. The black van. It was parked across the street from the bar. I told myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. But the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my heart started to race. I didn't want to get paranoid. I didn't want to give in to fear. But the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. I had a plan. I wasn't going to let myself be intimidated. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had no idea who these people were or what they were capable of. And that terrified me. Part 9. The Final Straw. The final straw came late one night when I was closing up the bar alone. I was wiping down the counter when I heard the sound of footsteps outside the door. I froze. There was something wrong about the way they echoed through the empty parking lot. A car had pulled up, but it didn't park. It just sat there, idling in the shadows. I couldn't see the driver through the tinted windows, but I could feel the tension build. I reached for my phone, quickly typing a text to my boss. "Something's off. Please stay on standby." Before I could send it, I heard a soft knock at the door. My pulse spiked. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, but I didn't open it. Instead, I peered through the glass, just enough to see the dark shape outside. It was the woman, and this time, she wasn't alone. Part 10. Unwelcome Guests. The knock at the door made my heart race. It wasn't just the fact that someone was here at closing time. It was the way the knock echoed in the silence. A deliberate sound, like someone testing my resolve. I swallowed hard, taking a cautious step back from the door. I was thankful for the heavy security glass that separated me from whatever was outside, but my mind was already running in circles. It was them. I didn't need to look to know it. The woman's presence. The way she always seemed to appear at the wrong time. It was unmistakable. And now she was here, knocking at my door in the dead of night, like she had all the time in the world. I glanced toward the back of the bar, where the door to the kitchen and storage was. I could bolt through there if needed, but I knew that wasn't a solution. I couldn't leave, not without some explanation, not without understanding who these people were and what they wanted from me. I reached down to grab my phone, texting my boss again. My fingers were shaking as I typed. "They're here. I need you to get here. Now. Please." I hit send, keeping my eyes fixed on the door. There was a brief moment of silence, and then, just as I started to feel the weight of the decision to open the door, I heard her voice. "Riley?" Her tone was sweet, but it held a sharp edge, like a blade hidden in a velvet glove. "We just want to talk, honey. You don't have to be afraid." I didn't respond. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing how much her words rattled me. But I could hear the intent in her voice, the subtle pressure behind her words that made it feel like she wasn't leaving until she got what she wanted. The longer I stood there, the more the door felt like a boundary that was about to be crossed. I tried to steady my breath, trying to push the panic down, but it was hard. My heart was beating so loudly I could feel it in my chest, and the tension in the air felt suffocating. I took a deep breath, then walked over to the door, making sure to stay behind the thick glass. I didn't open it completely, just cracked it enough to hear her better. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. She leaned against the doorframe, her smile still there but with an intensity that made me uneasy. "I told you, Riley, we just want to talk. We're not going to bite." Her voice dropped a little, becoming more serious. "You've been avoiding us, but we need to know if you're in or out. The opportunity's not going to last forever." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Her words sounded like a threat now, wrapped in the thin disguise of a sales pitch. I forced myself to stand tall, to not let her see how much her presence was affecting me. "I'm not interested in your opportunity," I said firmly. "You're wasting your time. Leave." Her smile faltered for the briefest moment, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, I don't think you understand, Riley. This isn't about what you want anymore. You're already involved. And if you don't make the right decision, things could get complicated for you." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. My stomach twisted. I wasn't sure what she meant by complicated, but I could sense the warning. The intimidation was so subtle, so calculated, that it took a moment for it to sink in. She wasn't just trying to convince me anymore. She was telling me what would happen if I refused. I gripped the door handle tighter, a surge of anger rising in me. "Get away from my bar. Now." For a moment, there was silence. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, she stepped back, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. I could feel the weight of her gaze on me even as she backed away. "We'll be back, Riley," she said coldly. "We'll give you some time to think about it. But just remember, we don't like to be kept waiting." Without another word, she turned and walked away. I didn't close the door until I was sure she was gone, my hand still trembling slightly as I slid the lock back into place. I stood there for a few moments, my back pressed against the door, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. The bar was still, eerily so. I wasn't sure if it was the fact that the jukebox had gone silent or the dread that had settled in my chest, but everything felt like it was on the edge of something dangerous. The last thing I wanted was for these people to return, but deep down I knew they would, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could stay safe if they did. Part 11. A change of strategy. The days that followed were a blur. I worked my shifts, kept my head down, and did everything I could to avoid thinking about the woman and the man. But I couldn't stop wondering when they'd show up again. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, like someone was always lurking just outside the door, waiting for me to slip up. The next few nights, I doubled down on my vigilance. I kept the doors locked tighter, made sure the security cameras were working, and even had a few extra checks on the parking lot. My boss made it clear he would be around more often, just in case. Still, despite his reassurances, I couldn't ignore the dread creeping into my bones every time I heard the door jingle. On one particular evening, I was closing up, making sure everything was set before heading out. It had been a quiet shift, which made me thankful. But as I was wiping down the bar, I noticed a figure standing outside the window. I froze. The man was there again. Not the woman this time, just him. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and texted my boss immediately. They're back. I need help. I didn't open the door, but I couldn't stop watching. He was just standing there, staring directly at the bar, watching me. It wasn't a casual glance. It was an intense, unblinking stare that made my skin crawl. I couldn't tell if he was waiting for something, but it felt like he knew I was watching him, too. A few moments later, the door creaked open, and I heard his footsteps as he walked inside. I swallowed, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. I kept my back to the bar, my fingers clenching around a bottle of whiskey, just in case. "Riley," he said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "I think we need to talk." I turned around slowly, my mind racing. He had the same cold, calculating look in his eyes as before. But there was something else now, something darker. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. I tried to keep my tone firm, but the fear was creeping in again, stronger this time. His lips curled into a half-smile, and I could see the faintest glint of something dangerous in his eyes. "I think you know what we want, Riley. We just need you to be a little more cooperative. No one's going to get hurt if you just make the right choice." The words sent a chill down my spine. This was no longer about a job or a chance at making money. This was something far more sinister. I didn't know how much longer I could keep playing this game, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let them get any closer. Whatever their intentions were, I needed to protect myself. The stakes were getting higher, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could survive in this twisted game they were playing. Part 12. The final confrontation. The man's words echoed in my head long after he left, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was running out of time. Each night felt like a countdown, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep avoiding the inevitable. He'd been right about one thing. I knew exactly what they wanted from me, but what they didn't know was that I wasn't going to let them have it without a fight. I couldn't work alone anymore. I couldn't face whatever they were planning by myself. Part 13. The Trap Titans. I didn't sleep well that night. Every noise outside the bar, every car that passed, made my heart race. I couldn't stop thinking about the man and his cold words, about the woman who had appeared with that unsettling smile, offering me something that felt like more than just money. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were closing in on me. The fear crept into my thoughts, darkening every moment of my shift. I was jumpy, watching every customer who came in too closely, wondering if one of them was another player in whatever game the woman and the man were orchestrating. I kept checking the parking lot, my eyes scanning for any sign of that black van. Around midnight, I saw it, the unmistakable silhouette of the black van, parked across the street just like before. My pulse quickened. I wasn't imagining it this time. They were here again, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever was coming next. I texted my boss, asking him to come by, but there was no reply. I checked my phone again, a pang of frustration rising in me. What if he didn't get the message? What if I was on my own? The door jangled again, and I froze, my blood running cold. I turned to see the woman walking in, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She wasn't alone. The man was with her. They walked up to the bar with that same eerie, confident air. The woman smiled, but it wasn't the polite smile from before. This time, it was cold, like a predator's smile. The man stood silently beside her, watching me with his calculating eyes. I could feel the weight of their presence before they even spoke. "We've been waiting for you to come around, Riley," the woman said, her voice sweet, but there was something sharp underneath it. "We thought you might need a little more time, but you've had plenty." I didn't answer, my mind racing. I was trying to think of my next move, trying to figure out what I could do. The feeling of being trapped was suffocating, like the walls of the bar were closing in on me. "You're not here for a drink, are you?" I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, though it felt like my throat was closing up with each passing second. "No," the man replied smoothly, his voice low and steady. "We're not here for a drink, Riley. We're here for you." The way he said it sent a wave of dread through me. My heart skipped a beat as I tried to keep my composure. I wasn't going to let them see that I was scared, but the truth was, I was terrified. I had no idea what they wanted or why they had chosen me. But now that they were here, I realized how much danger I was truly in. The woman leaned in slightly, her eyes gleaming in the low light of the bar. "You're not getting out of this, Riley. You should have known that when you got involved. You've been marked. We've been patient with you, but we need you to make the right decision now." I stood still, my mind racing. What decision? I wanted to yell at her, tell her to leave me alone, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. I wasn't in control here. They had the upper hand, and I could feel it in every word they spoke. She straightened up, eyeing me with a calculating gaze. "You know what we can offer you, but you also know what will happen if you refuse. If you walk away from this, we will make sure you regret it." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. I wasn't sure what they were threatening, but the way they spoke made it clear that they weren't playing games. They had power that I couldn't understand or escape from. But something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them take control of my life like this. I took a deep breath, staring them both down. "I don't care what you think you can do to me. I'm not joining you. I don't want any part of this." The woman's smile faltered for just a moment, but it quickly returned, colder and sharper. "Very well. she said. "You've made your choice. But don't say we didn't warn you." She turned toward the man, giving him a quick nod. And that was when I saw it. Something shifted in the air. A tension crackled between them, and I knew that something was about to happen. But what? The man stepped forward, his eyes never leaving me. "You think you can just walk away from this, Riley? That's not how this works. We don't give up that easily." Before I could react, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something. A piece of paper, folded neatly. He placed it on the counter in front of me, his hand steady as he slid it across to me. "This is the last offer you'll get from us," he said. "Take it or leave it." I stared at the paper, my mind racing. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want anything to do with them, but I knew I had to. I couldn't just stand there and act like I had any power in this situation. I reached forward slowly, picking up the paper with trembling hands. As I unfolded it, my stomach twisted in knots. The paper wasn't an offer, it was a contract. A contract for something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Something that tied me to them in a way I couldn't escape. I felt trapped, cornered, like there was no way out. "You're asking me to sign this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded, his gaze cold. "It's simple, really. Sign it, and you'll get everything we promised you. You'll never have to work in a bar again. You'll have money, power, a life you never dreamed of. But if you don't sign, well," he let the sentence hang in the air, the unspoken threat clear. I wanted to scream, to throw the paper back at them and run, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, my thoughts spiraling out of control. What was I supposed to do? What was I really risking if I refused? What would they do to me if I said no? I glanced up at them, both of them standing there, waiting for me to make a decision. My hand hovered over the paper, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, but all I could think about was how much I had already lost by even entertaining the situation. And then, just as I thought I might break, the door opened. I turned quickly, my heart skipping a beat, hoping it was my boss. But it wasn't him. It was someone else. Someone who had been standing at the door the whole time, watching. Part 14, The Last Choice. The man and woman didn't even flinch as the door opened. They both turned slightly, their expressions barely changing. But I saw it, just for a moment, an imperceptible shift in their posture. Their eyes narrowed, the tension in the room thickened, and I knew that whoever had just walked in wasn't just another customer. I turned to look, my heart racing, hoping to see my boss. But instead, standing in the doorway was a man I'd never seen before. His face was obscured by the shadows, but there was something about him that made my stomach drop. Something cold and dangerous in the way he stood there, his hands hidden in the pockets of his long, dark coat. He stepped forward, his footsteps slow and deliberate, like he knew the weight of his presence. The woman and man looked at each other, exchanging a quick, silent glance, before their attention shifted back to me. The woman's smile disappeared entirely, replaced by a sharp look of uncertainty. "Riley," the man said, his voice low, almost cautious now. "We weren't expecting company." The new man didn't say anything. He just continued walking toward the bar, his eyes fixed on me as he took each step with purpose. I felt the air grow heavier with every movement he made, like the room itself was closing in. When he finally reached the bar, he didn't sit. He stood there, leaning casually against the counter, his gaze never leaving me. There was something unsettling about his stillness, like he was in control of everything, even the space we were standing in. For a long moment, no one spoke. The woman and man stood stiffly, clearly unsure of how to proceed with the unexpected presence in the room. But the man finally broke the silence. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice laced with irritation. The newcomer didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out something, another piece of paper. It was folded like the one the man had given me, but it was different. The edges were worn, as if it had been handled far more than it should have been. He slid it across the bar toward me, not once looking at the woman or the man beside me. "This is the one you should sign," he said simply. I stared at the paper, but my fingers didn't move. The weight of the decision crushed me, like an anchor sinking deeper into my chest. The woman shot a glance at the man, clearly confused. "What's this? What do you think you're doing?" The new man didn't respond. His focus remained solely on me, like I was the only thing that mattered in this strange game they were all playing. The silence stretched out, suffocating. I swallowed, trying to steady myself, to make sense of what was happening. The room felt colder now, the low hum of the bar's neon lights seeming to fade as my pulse thundered in my ears. The man and woman exchanged another glance, and it was clear that they were no longer in control. I could feel it in the way they shifted, in the way they hesitated. They were waiting for this stranger to make his move, to reveal his hand, but he didn't. "I've made my choice," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I looked at the paper in front of me, the contract, the trap, and then back at the newcomer. "I'm not signing anything. Not from any of you." The woman's lips curled into a smirk, though it was tight with frustration. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "You still don't understand, do you?" she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "This is your last chance, Riley. Walk away, and there will be consequences." I stood my ground, though every instinct in me screamed to run, to escape from whatever was about to unfold. But just as the tension between us reached a breaking point, the new man finally spoke, his voice cutting through the charged silence. "Let her decide," he said, his tone cold, almost dismissive. "This one isn't yours to control anymore." The words hung in the air like an electric charge, and I felt the shift in the room again. The man and woman exchanged a long, heated look, but neither spoke. For the first time, they looked uncertain. I wasn't sure if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going down without a fight. This was my decision, and whatever it cost, I wasn't going to let them dictate my life any longer. The woman turned on her heel and walked toward the door, her steps purposeful, but her gaze lingering on me one last time. "You will regret this, Riley," she warned, her voice tinged with venom. I didn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the stranger, who still stood across the bar, silent and watchful. The door swung shut behind him, leaving an eerie calm in the room. I took a deep breath, the tension slowly draining from my shoulders, but the unease never left. I wasn't sure what I had just stepped into, but I knew I was far from free. The paper, the contract, still lay on the bar in front of me untouched, and I had a feeling this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Part 15. The calm before the storm. The police didn't arrest the woman and the man, much to my surprise. They didn't even ask for their IDs or question them further. It was almost like the officers knew them or were afraid to push too hard. The woman gave me one last look before she stepped out of the bar, her eyes cold and unblinking. The door swung shut behind them, and the silence that followed was almost deafening. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to do or how to feel. The officers lingered for a few moments, exchanging a few quiet words with each other, their presence oddly reassuring. One of the officers turned to me, noticing how shaken I was. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle but with an edge of concern. I nodded, trying to shake off the sense of dread that was still heavy in my chest. "I'm fine. I don't know what that was about." The officer gave me a reassuring smile. "You're safe now. If anything happens again, don't hesitate to call us." I wanted to thank him, but the words stuck in my throat. The woman and the man had been so composed, so confident in their power, and yet it felt like the police weren't taking the situation as seriously as they should have. I knew this wasn't over, no matter how much they reassured me. The officers lingered for another few minutes, but they left without saying anything else. I stood behind the bar for a long time after they were gone, my mind still spinning. I couldn't stop thinking about the way the woman had looked at me before leaving. It wasn't a look of defeat or frustration. It was something colder, like a promise that she'd be back. Part 16, The Return. I didn't know what time it was when the door opened again, but I knew who it was before I even saw their faces. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I turned slowly, the door jingling as it swung open. There they were, the woman and the man. This time, there were no police, no interruptions. They walked in like they owned the place, their movements calculated and purposeful. The woman's eyes were locked onto mine immediately. "I told you, Riley," she said, her voice smooth and cold. "You can't escape this. You've made your choice, and now you're ours." I felt a lump form in my throat, my chest tightening. I wanted to scream, to run, but I knew that wouldn't help me. I could feel the weight of their words settle into my stomach, a growing sense of dread that I couldn't shake. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. The man stepped forward this time, his eyes never leaving mine. "We've been patient," he said, his tone cold and methodical. "But you need to make a decision. You don't have any more time. We need you, Riley. You're part of this now, whether you want to be or not." I looked between them, trying to make sense of it all. What was this? What had I gotten myself into? I had thought that the police would be the end of it, that I would finally be free of them. But now they were here again, closing in on me, and I realized just how little control I really had in this situation. The woman smiled again, but this time, it wasn't just a simple smile. It was a smirk, like she knew something I didn't, like she had already won. "You can't hide from us forever, Riley," she said, her voice soft but dripping with venom. "The sooner you accept that, the better for everyone. We don't want to make this harder than it has to be." I didn't respond right away. I was too stunned by the realization of how far they were willing to go. They weren't just offering something. They weren't just trying to convince me anymore. They were threatening me, using fear to force my compliance. And the worst part was, I didn't know what they wanted from me, or what they would do if I refused. The uncertainty was suffocating. I felt like I was trapped in a maze, and every turn I took only led me deeper into their control. But there was something else, a spark of defiance, of rage. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to be intimidated into submission. "You won't get away with this," I said, my voice trembling but determined. "I won't sign. I won't be a part of whatever this is." The woman and the man exchanged a look, and for a moment, I thought they might back off. But instead, the man took a step forward, his jaw tightening. "You don't understand, do you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This isn't a choice. This is your life now. You can't go back to what it was. You're already in deeper than you realize." I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to say something to fight back, but the words caught in my throat. They were right. I was already in too deep. Every step I took, every decision I made, only pulled me further into their web. And I knew that if I didn't act soon, there would be no way out. Part 20. The Final Confrontation. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew it was him. The same cold, calculating man who had been haunting me all this time. He stepped into the bar, his expression unreadable, as though he had been expecting me to cower in fear. His eyes locked onto mine, and I knew without a doubt that this was it. The game had reached its final move. "I thought you'd be ready for us by now, Riley," he said, his voice calm and almost detached. But there was a dark undertone to it, something that told me he wasn't here for small talk anymore. His posture was stiff, and his hands rested loosely at his sides. "Get out," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "You have no idea what you're messing with. This has gone too far." He smiled slightly, but it wasn't the same smile from before. This one was almost smug, like he knew something I didn't. "You're the one who's gone too far, Riley. You don't get to decide how this ends. You're already in the middle of it." I backed away from him, but my eyes never left his. The door behind me was still slightly open, and I could see the van parked in the lot. I knew they wouldn't leave until they got what they came for. "Why me?" I asked, my voice cracking with frustration. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" The man's smile faded as he took a step closer, his voice lowering as if sharing a secret. "It's not about you, Riley. It's about the bigger picture. You were just a necessary part of the plan. We needed someone who could blend in, someone who wouldn't attract attention, someone who had the right look. You fit the bill perfectly." I felt my breath hitch. The implication in his words was chilling, and I realized far too late that I had been a pawn all along. I had been chosen for something bigger than I could ever have imagined, and now it was too late to walk away. "You're not going anywhere," he added, his voice cold and final. "Not now, not ever." Suddenly, the door slammed open behind him, and I turned to see the woman step into the bar, her eyes dark and unblinking. She wasn't smiling anymore. In fact, she looked almost angry. "I told you, Riley," she said, her voice hard and unyielding. "You should have signed. Now you're just making it harder on yourself." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. It was happening. It was all happening. This wasn't just an offer anymore. It was a threat. It wasn't about money or a job. It was about control, and they weren't going to let me escape. I didn't know what else to do. I could feel the panic starting to take over, my breath coming in shallow gasps. They were too close now, and I couldn't outrun them. The woman stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "You don't have a choice, Riley. This is your life now." Just as she reached out toward me, I saw a flash of light from the corner of my eye. It was my boss. He had come through the back door, and he wasn't alone. Two of the officers from the police station were with him, their hands on their holsters as they moved toward the woman and the man, their eyes narrowed and their postures tense. "You're done here," my boss said, his voice calm, but carrying an authority that made both of the intruders stop in their tracks. "You're not welcome anymore." The woman and the man exchanged a quick glance, their expressions shifting into something darker. I could tell they were trying to figure out their next move, but the officers didn't give them a chance. "Step away from her," one of the officers commanded, his voice firm. "Now." The man hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting toward the woman, but then with a slow, deliberate movement, he stepped back. The woman did the same, but not without giving me a look that promised this wasn't over. "Don't think this is the end, Riley," She spat, her voice venomous. "We'll be back. And when we do, you'll wish you'd taken our offer." She turned, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she walked out of the bar, the man following closely behind her. The door swung shut with a soft jingle. Part 21. The Aftermath. I stood there for a long moment, the adrenaline slowly fading from my system. My heart was still racing, but it was starting to sink in that they were gone, at least for now. The bar was silent again, save for the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of my own shaky breath. My boss walked over to me, his expression softening when he saw how rattled I was. "You all right?" he asked quietly, concern in his voice. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I was okay. The fear still clung to me, and the weight of what had happened, the near miss, the threats, the game they had been playing with my life, was almost too much to bear. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. I couldn't even find the words to fully express the relief I felt. He had saved me, and I wasn't sure what would have happened if he hadn't shown up when he did. "We're not done yet," he said grimly, "but you're safe for now. I'll be making sure you're never alone again. This isn't over, but we're not going to let them get away with it." I nodded, my mind spinning. It wasn't over. I knew that. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I might have a chance at surviving whatever this was. I wasn't alone anymore, and that gave me hope. Epilogue. The long road ahead. In the weeks that followed, the woman and the man didn't return. But I knew better than to think they were gone for good. They had made their intentions clear, and it wasn't over until I was fully free of them. For now, though, I had my bar, my friends, and a sense of security that I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't going to let them control my life. I had fought back, and I would continue to fight until I was truly free. But even as I went back to my normal routine, I couldn't forget the promise they'd made. They would be back, and when they did, I would be ready. Part 22. The Return. A week passed, then two. I kept my head down, working my shifts at the bar, trying to push the fear to the back of my mind. The black van never returned, and the woman and the man never showed up again. For the first time in months, I thought, just for a moment, that maybe I was safe. But that fleeting sense of safety was soon shattered. It was a quiet Wednesday night when I first noticed them again. I was wiping down the counter, lost in thought, when the door jingled open. I glanced up, half expecting a regular, maybe a trucker stopping for a late-night drink. But instead, I saw the same woman standing in the doorway, her cold eyes locking onto mine. My heart skipped a beat. She wasn't alone. The man stepped in behind her, his expression just as unreadable as before. They walked into the bar like they owned the place, their presence suffocating the air. I knew immediately that they weren't here for casual conversation. This was a moment I had been dreading. I froze, the weight of the situation crashing down on me all at once. I had been trying so hard to pretend like I could just go on with my life, that everything would return to normal. But I knew it wouldn't. Not with them. Not with the way they kept coming back, no matter how many times I tried to shut them out. "You're persistent," I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound confident. The woman smiled, but it wasn't the friendly smile she used to wear. This time it was colder, calculating, almost sinister. "We told you, Riley. This isn't a game. We're not going away." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "What do you want from me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. It was never about money. It was never about a job. It was about control. And they wouldn't stop until they had it. The man stepped forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "It's simple. We want you to join us. We want you to accept your place in all of this. You've known it all along deep down. You just needed to stop running from it." I stood there, frozen. The words hit me harder than I expected. All this time, I've been trying to convince myself that there was some way to escape, that I could outrun them, that I could fight them off. But the truth was I couldn't. I was trapped. They had been pulling the strings, and I hadn't even realized it until it was too late. But I wasn't going to let them see that I was afraid. Not now. Not when they were so close. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'll never join you. I'm not your pawn." The woman's smile never wavered. "You don't have a choice, Riley. You're already part of the plan. All that's left is for you to accept it." I could feel the air in the room grow heavy, like something was building. Something dangerous, something that couldn't be undone. And just as I thought I was about to lose control, I heard a familiar voice. Step away from her. I turned to see my boss standing in the doorway, his face grim. But this time, he wasn't alone. The police officers who had helped me before were standing behind him, ready for a fight. The woman's smile faltered for a brief moment, but she recovered quickly. She turned to the man, and they exchanged a quick, tense glance. I could feel the tension in the air, thickening with every passing second. It was clear they hadn't expected backup. "This isn't over," the woman hissed, her voice low and filled with venom. "You think you can stop us? We've come too far for that." But my boss didn't flinch. "I'm done playing games with you," he said, his voice unwavering. "Get out. Now. Before we make you." For a long moment, the woman and the man just stood there, sizing us up as if weighing their options. They were calculating, always calculating, but this time, it was different. This time, they weren't in control. Finally, the man spoke. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." With that, he turned and the woman followed, their footsteps fading as they left the bar. The door swung shut behind them with a soft jingle. I stood there, my heart racing, my mind spinning. I didn't know if this was the end or just another chapter in this nightmare. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living in fear. I had to face them once and for all. Part 23. The Decision. The night dragged on in a blur. The officers stayed with me for a while, making sure everything was secure before they left. My boss stayed close, but the silence between us was heavy. After they left, I sat down at the bar, my hands trembling as I poured myself a drink, something strong. The weight of everything that had happened in the last few months hit me all at once, and I felt the gravity of my situation, like a 1,000-pound weight pressing down on me. I wasn't safe. Not really. They would come back, and when they did, I would have to be ready. I couldn't keep running. I couldn't keep hiding behind the bar, pretending like everything would go back to normal. The woman and the man, they weren't just threats. They were part of something bigger, something I wasn't even sure I could understand. But I couldn't let them win. "I'm going to end this," I whispered to myself, though I didn't know exactly how. I knew there was no going back. If I wanted to be free, I would have to face whatever came next. And if I was going to do that, I couldn't be alone. I needed to fight back, and I needed help. Part 24, The Final Stand. The following days were a blur of preparation. I spoke to the police, trying to get as much information as I could. I reached out to people I trusted, my boss, a few friends, and told them everything. No more secrets, no more hiding. The woman and the man, they weren't just playing a game. They were part of something far more dangerous, and I wasn't about to let them drag me further into it. The time for running was over. The night of the final confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. I wasn't alone anymore. My boss, the officers, and a few close friends were waiting with me. We had a plan, a way to corner the woman and the man once and for all. They weren't expecting us to be ready for them, and that was the edge we needed. The bar was quiet that night, too quiet. And then, just as I thought the calm would last, the door opened. There they were again, the woman and the man, stepping into the bar like they had before. But this time, they weren't expecting what came next. Before they could even take a step, the officers moved in, blocking the door, guns drawn. The man's eyes flashed with surprise, but he didn't make a move. The woman's expression darkened, and for the first time, I saw the raw anger underneath her calm facade. "This ends tonight," I said, my voice unwavering. "We don't have to do this," the woman replied, her voice filled with venom. "You still have time to join us." "No," I said firmly, stepping forward. "It's over." The officers moved in, arresting both of them. The man didn't resist, but the woman tried to lunge toward me one last time. But before she could get close, my boss stepped between us, holding her back with ease. "Not this time," he muttered. Part 25, A New Beginning. It was finally over. The woman and the man were taken into custody, their plans unraveled and their influence broken. The authorities made sure to investigate every lead, uncovering the full extent of their operation. They had been part of a larger network, but without their key players, the rest of the system fell apart. I could finally breathe. The bar became my refuge again, and though the fear lingered, it wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. I had survived, but more than that, I had taken control of my life again. I couldn't erase what had happened, and I knew the scars would last. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized something. I had faced my fear. I had stood up to the shadows, and I had won. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Riley's fate is sealed. But what about you? The world she was pulled into is dark, dangerous, and full of secrets. But she survived. What would you do if faced with the same choice? Would you fight back or fall prey to the shadows? If you're hungry for more twists, more suspense, and stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button and join the journey. Don't miss what's coming next. Like this video if you can't wait to see what happens when the shadows come for you. And leave a comment below. What would you do if you were Riley? We want to know your thoughts. The game's not over. It's just beginning.